The Mecklenburg County election debates are a service of WTVI, Mecklenburg County, and the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The views and opinions expressed in these debates are those of the candidates and do not necessarily represent the views of WTVI, its management, Mecklenburg County, or the League of Women Voters.
WTVI PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters present Election Debate 2015.
Hello, I'm Danielle Koser with WTVI PBS Charlotte. We're delighted you could join us for the Charlotte City Council District 7 debate, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. We have two candidates in this race. Questions for the debate were provided by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The questions were not shared in advance to the candidates. I will call on the candidates in random order to answer the questions. The candidates will have 1 minute to answer each question. Now, if you'd like to challenge an opponent, please raise up your yellow challenge card. You'll have 30 seconds to respond. Each candidate will have 3 challenges during this debate. There are no opening statements, but each candidate will have the opportunity to make a 30-second closing statement. And now let's meet the candidates for the Charlotte City Council District 7. They are Ed Driggs and Chris Turner. Let's begin with our first question. Mr. Driggs, one of your goals for your district is fairness for District 7. Let the district get more of the benefits of the tax dollars it pays. Now, given that the city invested a lot in the roads, development, and other infrastructure of District 7, and they are all quite new and modern, what more does the district want?
The city recently passed a community investment plan of $816 million for capital spending in Charlotte, almost none of which is being spent in District 7. And in fact, about 25% of the residential property tax base is in the district. We have needs in the area of roads. We have old farm roads that need to be expanded. They're carrying much heavier traffic than they were intended for. There are safety issues near schools in some instances. So I think if you look at the average investment over 20 years of about $8 million a year in the district, it's not enough to maintain the prosperity we have and the benefit for Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Ms. Turner, your question, how does District 7 benefit from being part of a thriving, growing city, and what more does it need?
Well, I think District 7 has been very blessed as far as its growth and the growth potential that it has going forward. And it certainly has contributed to the city as far as some of the amenities that are there and bringing businesses, as far as large corporations moving into the area. So I think it was well designed from that perspective, and the developers did a good job in that. However, it's had its growth problems also, because the roads are not at the current time. We do have some nice infrastructure in the Ballantyne area, but there are some surrounding areas that do need some attention. And I think that we can continue to work on those things in District 7, and they are important for a large amount of the constituents that may be missing out on some of the things that have been occurring in District 7. We need to make sure that everyone gets what they need, regardless of where they live within the district.
For this next question, you'll both have 30 seconds to answer. All of the development approved on Providence Road is creating enormous congestion. How can the council deal with congestion from new developments? Mr. Driggs, we'll start with you.
We have started a conversation on council about the fact that our zoning process looks at land use but doesn't properly take into account the impact on roads, schools, even our water supply. So we need to build that in formally so that we're not saying yes or no on an arbitrary basis to new development. Development is good. Growth is good. It creates jobs. We don't want to cut it back, but we have to have a way of recognizing the impact it has on quality of life for our citizens.
Thank you. And Ms. Turner?
Well, I think that I'm going to get you to repeat the question, please.
Absolutely. The question is, all the development approved on Providence Road is creating enormous congestion. How can the council deal with congestion from new developments?
Well, we certainly need to create a long-term vision, and the city put together in 2010 a transportation vision for 2030, and of course, unfortunately, it is set idle. And I think that we need to bring that back to the forefront, and let's rework it if it needs to be reworked, and set a plan in place, determine how we can fund some of the infrastructure out there to help the congestion that we're going to continue to receive because of the development along Providence Corridor.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. This next question is a yes or no question. We do ask that you keep your answer simply to a yes or no. No developers have participated in the city's density bonus plan, which would allow higher density for developments that include affordable housing in affluent districts. Is the city too lenient in approving rezonings to higher densities, which don't include affordable housing? Yes or no? Ms. Turner?
Are the zoning not helping the developers? I'm sorry, the last part of that?
Sure, I'll repeat the question. The question is, no developers have participated in the city's density bonus plan, which would allow higher density for developments that include affordable housing in affluent districts. The question, is the city too lenient in approving rezonings to higher densities, which don't include affordable housing? Yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
No.
And for this next question, you will each again have 1 minute to answer. There are many intersections along I-485 that are prospects for future development. What planning and zoning needs to happen now to foster smarter growth that mitigates congestion and sprawl along them? Mr. Driggs?
There's a widening going on right now on 485 between I-77 and I-74. That includes, if you look at the NCDOT plan, some interchanges and new intersections, including in places where there aren't any right now. The challenge for us is to make sure that the secondary roads that access I-485, for which some of which the city is responsible and others the NCDOT, that we bring along the traffic infrastructure to facilitate access to and from 485. So, for example, the Weddington Road will become an interchange. We will also have high-speed access ramps off of Community House that aren't there right now. The whole picture is going to change, and as I say, the challenge is to make sure that we anticipate the impact on all of the roads around 485 to keep the traffic moving.
And Ms. Turner?
Well, for 485, there's some discussion as far as whether or not we would have a toll lane along 485, and I'm certainly not in favor of that. I think we've seen what that's done as far as the 77 toll lane fiasco. And I'm not in favor of continuing to widening 485. I think we need to look at other transportation possibilities for that area because it is growing exponentially. The Waverly and Ray Farms certainly is creating more traffic on Providence Road. The developers have done a good job in trying to design alternative routes for that, but I think we need to look at a long-range plan for our transportation, such as light rail. I think, again, we go back to the transportation of program for 2030 that is put in place.
We'll move along to the next question. Recent incidents across the nation have raised public awareness about inequities in policing policies. How do you hold the police department accountable for changes that need to be made? Ms. Turner, we'll start with you.
Well, certainly what we've seen that's come out of the Carrick trial, there are obviously some missings as far as training is concerned. So I think that we need to go back and look at the training programs for our CMPD. And then we need to hold the officers accountable. I would have to say personally, one of the things that seemed to come out of that is turning off the camera in the car. So if we're going to install having cameras on the officers, we need to make them accountable, make sure that they don't turn them off, that they turn them on at the correct time. So I think training is a big issue as far as our CMPD.
And Mr. Driggs?
We approved, $7 million to fund the body cameras for the officers. That was intended to help clarify situations as to whether their conduct was inappropriate or whether perhaps a member of the public behaved inappropriately for the benefit of the officer. We also looked very hard at CMPD's policies in the context of a non-profiling resolution that was passed by City Council and for which I voted. The concern I have is that the officers themselves feel that they're being targeted. I'm afraid that the effectiveness of our law enforcement could be undermined if there's too strong a presumption because of misbehavior of some officers that all officers are not doing their jobs. And in fact, the majority of our police officers are very conscientious. They're just trying to prevent crime and keep the public safe, and that would be a concern of mine.
Now, these next three questions are yes or no questions. So again, we just ask that you keep your answer to yes or no. Would you support or vote against expansion of the non-discrimination ordinance for LGBT residents? Yes or no? Ms. Turner?
Yes, I would vote for it.
Mr. Driggs?
No.
Next question again, yes or no. Given the needs that candidates have already identified, including transportation, congestion, housing, and economic development, how would you find the resources to tackle them? Is raising taxes an option? Yes or no? Mr. Driggs?
No.
Ms. Turner?
I think it has to be studied to determine how we would pay for the things that we need.
Yes or no?
And this next question, again, a yes or no. Should the Civilian Review Board have subpoena power for individual testimony rather than just record review? Yes or no? Ms. Turner?
Yes.
And Mr. Driggs?
No.
Now, this next question, some describe Charlotte zoning codes as weak with countless Band-Aid amendments. Do you agree? What changes, if any, do you favor to address these complaints? Ms. Turner, we'll start with you.
Well, I know that there's being a study done currently as far as the rezoning, and I understand it must be quite antiquated. I certainly have not sat down and read the entire zoning policy that we have, but I believe it was created in 1976. It's been indicated that the study may take a year, and I think it's going to take longer than that because of the way this city has grown, certainly since 1976. So I think that we need to wait until that study's done and then determine what we need to do as far as our rezoning policy.
And Mr. Driggs?
We are actually, in fact, undertaking a complete revision of the zoning ordinance. It's 600 pages long. A lot of it is out of date. But I think actually many of the problems we have with zoning are not related to the code itself. They're related to the procedures that we use for considering petitions for rezonings. And therefore, what's also happening on council is we're talking about how we can take into account, for example, the impact on schools, how we can take into account impacts on roads, and maybe just through a change in our process, improve the service that we provide to the community with the zoning.
Our next question, Montgomery County, Maryland, has a high success rate using housing policies as a tool to improve economic mobility, the school system, and quality of life. What policies would Charlotte need to get similar results? Mr. Driggs?
This is a very difficult question that's been brought to the forefront, particularly by the fact that Charlotte was found to be 50th in terms of economic mobility among the major cities. We're looking at housing policies. It's going to have an implication for the schools. The problem is the state doesn't actually allow mandatory inclusionary housing, which means we have to operate within the realm of discretionary, voluntary, and I think, as you noted, nobody has actually taken advantage of the incentives that we have for that. The concern I have is that we try to address these issues with the best of intentions, and we create dislocations in the community that don't actually solve the problems that we're hoping to solve. And therefore, we need to work on the issues, and work is being done by the Economic Opportunity Task Force, which the city has helped to fund. But we do have to be careful about trying to socially engineer where people live or mix the schools in ways that, in fact, nobody actually wants.
Ms. Turner?
Well, I know there are incentives out there for the developers to incorporate what I would call workforce housing. There's a lot of different terms for it, but obviously these incentives are not enticing enough if you want to do incentives. I think that we need to look at that from a city standpoint to determine a better way to get the developers to incorporate what I would call workforce housing. The way the city is growing, we really do need to get people closer to where they work and play and want to live, and also offer them that mobility. And so I think working on other policies, it's the incentive at this particular point obviously is for the developer as far as making money. It's prohibiting them from making the money that they want to make. And so I think that we need to make our rules a little more difficult.
You'd like to challenge?
I just want to make the comment, the incentives that we do offer are actually quite powerful. You can have double the density if you have inclusionary housing, for example. It was looked at the Golf Link site on Ray Road, and it's still not enough to overcome the market forces which dictate where people really want to be. the preferences they express through their choices. So I don't know what it takes in terms of incentives, but the fact is we have some incentives in place that are quite powerful.
We'll move along to the next question. Many citizens are concerned that council has a short-term vision about city issues. What's your long-term vision for Charlotte, and how can you convince other council members to support big-picture thinking on issues like the need for public transportation and economic development linked to social mobility? Ms. Turner, we'll start with you.
Yes. In fact, I was fortunate enough to be one of 150 citizen members for the Mecklenburg Livable Community Plan. And that plan outlines for the next 20 to 25 years as far as what we need to do for a large metropolitan area to help it to grow but also connect us and to offer the opportunities for people that are coming to Charlotte, be welcoming, offering them what they hope to receive when they move to Charlotte. So I think in looking at the Livables Community Plan, it would give us a good roadmap. And I would love to see the City Council utilize that as a tool in looking at what our vision needs to be to make the city of Charlotte more enticing to bring companies and individuals here.
Mr. Driggs?
We already actually have a vision right now that's been adopted by council. It's worked on every year through our focus area plans that involve centers, wedges, and corridors. It's a blueprint for where we would like Charlotte to be. Difficulty we've had in the last few years, of course, is that we're about to have our 5th mayor in 3 years. And that's where a lot of the leadership might come from on council. What I've done personally is work on our budgeting process to put in place longer-term forecasts to estimate what our funding availability is and try to identify the priorities that we know about now, such as a transportation center, other transportation needs, the funding for the streetcar, which I've opposed all along, but the fact is that that's going to require, and we don't have a plan for that right now. So I think one of the first steps is to put in place a financial framework so that we can pursue the goals that we've already established for Charlotte in the long term.
Well, it's time now for the candidates to offer their 30-second closing statement. We'll begin with Ed Driggs.
Thank you. I've worked hard for the last 2 years to represent the interests of my district, of all the people in my district, to respond to their emails, to zoning challenges, and at the same time to work on behalf of conservatives in the whole city of Charlotte to try to maintain fiscal responsibility and keep taxes down. So I hope that you will send me back to Charlotte City Council and let me continue that work. I thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this event today, and I hope you'll go to my website, ed@eddriggs.com, and read more about my candidacy. Thank you.
And Chris Turner, your 30-second closing statement.
Yes, I'm Chris Turner, and I'm running for City Council District 7. And I hope that you will go out and vote for me on November the 3rd. I feel like that all of the constituents in District 7 have really not been heard. I think there are some issues, and we have become a very diverse district. And I think that we need to have more voices at the table as far as the concerns that they may have in District 7. And I feel like that what we need to do, if I'm on City Council, I'm going to move about the district and talk to people and try to get them engaged in the process of what we need to do to help District 7.
Well, again, I'd like to thank both of our candidates for taking part in the Charlotte City Council District 7 debate. For more information about the election, you can visit pbscharlotte.org or the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Their website is www.goleaguego.org. The general election will be held Tuesday, November 3rd. All polling locations will be open from 6:30 in the morning until 7:30 in the evening. But you must vote at your assigned polling location. You can find that location on your voter card. Remember, every vote matters. Thanks for joining us.